Tell me who's on.
We're live.
Awesome. We've got people joining us now here on Periscope.
Yep, they're coming.
All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to start this outside. I want to welcome those of you who are new to the Free Capitalist Project. The Periscope is not going to be a radio show tonight. We're just doing a straight-up live Periscope. And we're going to talk about a wide range of details related to the cause of liberty. We're going to talk tonight about President Obama's gun grab, the truth about what's going on that you aren't hearing anywhere. We're going to also talk about what's going on Oregon, specifically with the last-minute news. Some of you may have noticed, even though the government's been playing coy with what their strategy is going to be to deal with what's going on up in Oregon, it looks like maybe tonight there's some good intelligence that says there may be some kind of drastic action taken tonight. So we are actually live streaming that as well. So we'll be giving you updates on that throughout this Periscope. We're going to talk about Kimball having a redundant Periscope broadcast. No, I'm just teasing. So Kimball's going to be filming this, so you can't see him, but hi, Kimball. Thank you, Kimball. Everybody should say hi and thank you to Kimball.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about what's going on up in Oregon. We're going to talk about Ammon Bundy's position, the idea of civil disobedience, and is this principled? Is this what lovers of liberty should be doing? And the importance of a good strategy in this war that we're in. We're going to talk about the LDS Church's response to what's going up on Idaho, and also Promise Keepers' response to what's going on up in Idaho. And I will just tell you, my friends, that one of the reasons, some of you know I haven't been on Periscope since the holidays. And I've been a bit hesitant to jump in the middle of this discussion, and we'll talk about why that is. But if you've seen the movie The Patriot, we're entering a period of this war, my friends, where fair weather friends are worth nothing. And this is a war. And if you don't know that, if you're not ready to internalize that this fight for liberty is a war, and we have entered a new era of escalation in this war, if you don't know that, it's time to wake up and turn your brain on. And Fairweather Friends of Liberty are hurting the cause, not helping the cause. And so when we have this conversation, I also have to tell you tonight, I'm going to be exceptionally candid. I'm going to talk to you about some things that some of you know, my story and my battle with the federal government. I'm talking about some things I know that I haven't talked about before, because there's a lot of call to arms going on. There's a lot of call to action about Obama's gun grab today and the passing of these, supposed executive orders, strengthening supposed regulations. There's a lot of, political hullabaloo going on, but the truth of what's going on is just incredible. And for people who love liberty, I've been in this liberty movement for a long time. And some of you know I've paid a little bit of a price. Some of you have even paid a greater price. But I've been around the block in this. And this new chapter is going to leave behind these kind of slogan-only liberty lovers. These people like to sit back and, have wars on Facebook and talk to their friends about the real meaning of the Second Amendment, without being willing to stake out a change in your life and building relationships, real relationships with people who are standing up for freedom. It's time to make sure you know who our friends are. Okay, I've been disgusted at the lack of awareness, strategic awareness by people who love liberty or who claim to love liberty. You do not attack your friends in the middle of a war, even when you disagree with them. Think about that for a minute, my friends. We're in a war. And you say, well, what do you mean a war? I'm not speaking hyperbole. If you don't want it to be a shooting war, that means you've got to win before it gets to that point. And we've been getting our butts kicked. Okay, the cause of liberty has been losing. That's why things are getting more escalated and more amped up. I was watching Alex Jones today, and he was saying, hey, we're winning the information war. I don't mean we haven't had any good things. I don't mean we haven't had some good developments. Heck, since Barack Obama has become the president of the United States, a lot of people have started to wake up. Okay? But the liberty movement is still failing en masse. We're so full of bickering and infighting, and we're not organized, and we're not effective. And so tonight, in this Periscope, I want to talk to you, my friends. I want to talk to you about what we can do to win. If you don't want to win, if you're just a liberty-loving couch potato, get off this. Get off. If you work for the government, get off. Unless you're a liberty lover who happens to be in the government to fight for liberty. Because the purpose of this is not entertainment. Okay, the purpose of this Periscope is not to, satisfy your cravings for some unique information you can talk about tomorrow with your friends. In a very real way, I want to send my voice out tonight to those of you who, like me and like those of my friends in the Free Capitalist Project and the American Liberty Society, are willing to put it all on the line for liberty. And it's a call to be more serious and to really wake up. So before I go inside here, I got a lot to talk about. If you don't know what's going on up in Oregon, we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. If you don't know what's really going on with Obama's gun grab today, we're going to talk about that tonight. If you didn't see the news story that broke from InfoWars tonight about the Republican National Committee supposedly considering 46 counts, criminal charges against President Barack Obama and impeachment, if you don't know about that, we're going to talk about that a little bit tonight. Some of you who have participated with us before on the radio program and Uber conference and things like that asked me on Facebook, hey, how can I participate in this Periscope? Well, here's the deal. Kimball's going to be our cameraman today, so Kimball is watching your comments here on Periscope, and we're going to take a break every few minutes or every 15 minutes or so, maybe 30 minutes if I really get going, and I'm going to answer your questions. And so if you've got questions and you got comments you'd like me to respond to, if you want to know the free capitalist perspective, the liberty perspective from a free capitalist, you can ask any question you want. All is fair. I'll address any question you have. But let's make the most of this. This is real time, out of our real lives. And, the reason I wanted to stand out here a little bit is to also remind some of you, it's not just people up in Oregon that are making a stand. This war is everywhere. This battle for liberty is reaching a critical climax. And here at Liberty Reef, and in places all across this country, there are people who love liberty, who are willing to stand up for liberty. But we've got to be smart, my friends. We've got to be smart. We've got to be strategic. We just can't go off half-cocked. This is not Saturday morning cartoons. Okay? And we are getting our butts kicked by an over-oppressive element of the federal government and state governments and city governments who have a bad mentality, who have a collectivist, statist, socialistic mentality. And some of them don't even realize it, okay? And I'm just going to start off, this will be the last thing I say before we go inside. I just want to start the call by saying we've got to change the narrative. And this is something you can do. This is something we can do every day in our discussions with our friends, with our family, on Facebook, on blogs, on Tumblr, on Twitter. The narrative, we're not anti-government. People who love liberty and love this country are not anti-government. We're pro-government. If you stand up for the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the United States is what creates our government. Okay? So don't let people ever get away with calling you anti-government. We are pro-government. We are pro-principled republic. We are pro-limited, freedom-oriented, principle-based, law-abiding citizenry. The people who are in the government, who are engaged in overreach and corruption and usurpation and tyranny, who are using the government and abusing the government, they are anti-government, and we are going to get them out. That's the only way to win this war, my friends, one way or the other. Non-violently or violently, the only way to win a war is to get the enemy out of power. And the enemy is not the federal government of the United States. You cannot believe that if you love the Constitution of the United States, because the Constitution of the United States creates the government of the United States. The enemy are those who have infiltrated our government from the top down and who pretend to love the government, but they're abusing freedom. They're abusing liberty. Some are doing it accidentally. Some are sheep. and they're following leaders who are corrupt and diabolical. We're going to talk specifically. I'll give you some names tonight. But we are the pro-government movement. We are the pro-republic movement. And we must do more than be isolated lone wolves out here spouting off, oh, I read the Constitution and the government doesn't have the right to own federal land. Well, you can say that. But what are you going to do about it? Because the people who are the usurpers don't give a damn what you say. And you are weak. The liberty movement, with just individuals all over, not organized, not strategically acting, we're weak and we get picked off. And I'm worried tonight. I'm worried about our friends up in Oregon. I'm worried that they are no match for the organized tyranny that they're about to confront. And I thank God for good men and women in the federal government, in the state governments, in the armed services, in the police forces, in the sheriff's offices, in the government office. I'm thank God for good people who are upholding the principles of liberty. One of the reasons we know tonight what some of the government is planning up in Oregon is because we have friends in the government who are doing their duty to de-escalate and to avoid violence. Okay? I said last thing, one more thing. If you think that Ammon Bundy and his friends and associates up in Oregon are terrorists, you're an idiot. Okay? And I don't care how passionate you are, my invitation to you is don't be an idiot. Okay? Wake up. Can you not tell the difference between a terrorist? Are you such a brain-off sheep that you can't tell the difference for yourself between a patriot and a terrorist? See, the federal government, there are those in the federal government who are trying to blur that distinction. And they're trying to create this equivocation that if you're a patriot, if you're a constitutionalist, you're also risky, and you're also dangerous, and you're also a terrorist. And some of us in the liberty movement are giving them power by not making the distinction. You might disagree with Ammon, okay? You might disagree with what they're doing up in Oregon. But how can you, with any sense whatsoever, claim that they are terrorists? They have not fired a weapon. They have not exercised force against any person. And they have rationally, calmly, and publicly stated their aims. They may be protesters. They may even be politically misguided. I'm not here to talk about that. We'll talk about that later. You're not stupid if you have a disagreement with them. You're stupid if you can't make the distinction between people who show up in a school with an automatic weapon and start shooting, or show up in California with, their wife armed with tactical gear and automatic weapons and start shooting. Okay? Those are terrorists. Terrorists don't show up peacefully and make demands for redress from their government. Now, you might say, well, they didn't show up peacefully, they had guns. Having a gun and using a gun are not the same thing. Are the police terrorists? Because they have guns everywhere they go. Is our military terrorists? Because they have guns everywhere they go. What terrorism has to do with how you use force. And if you can't make that distinction, you are no friend of liberty. We are not a bunch of wimpy pacifists. We want peace. People who love liberty, capitalists, people who love this republic, we want peace. We'll give our lives for peace. But we will not live on our knees, disarmed and unable to defend ourselves. Again, you may disagree with these people up in Oregon. You may passionately disagree with them. But you better wake up and sober yourself to be able to make a distinction between cowards who show up at grade schools or shopping malls or abortion clinics or anywhere, universities, and shoot unarmed people, and then usually themselves, or movie theaters. If you let people make that distinction, if you let people call Ammon Bundy a terrorist, you are complicit in the tyranny. You are part of the problem because you're not thinking. And we can't win this battle without thinking. We will lose if our friends aren't thinking. All right. So you got me worked up. Let's answer some questions. Kimball, tell me some comments or questions. If you've got some and you want to post them, Kimball, just tell them to me and I'll answer them, and then we'll go inside and we'll kind of dive into the substance of some of these things. So any meaningful comments or questions?
Someone's asking if you have ever looked up the definition of terrorism. I don't know if you even want to waste your time.
Have I looked up the definition of terrorism?
Yeah.
Does it sound like I haven't looked up the definition of terrorism? I know what terrorism is. Yes, I'm a literate human being. Yes, I know the definition of terrorism, and it has to do with how you use force. Yeah. Who are these people up in Oregon supposedly terrorizing? And I'll tell you another thing. Montel Williams has lost all credibility with any rational thinking person in the United States. The idea that you would support, that anyone, especially Montel Williams, would support the use of lethal force against someone whose only actions didn't put anyone in danger but put property at risk. Let me just tell you, if you came home one day and you found someone in your home, okay, but they didn't exercise force against you or violence against you, and you shot them dead, you would go to prison. Okay? Because if they're not threatening you, if they don't represent a physical threat to you, you got to get clear on this, my friends. You may think they're violating the law, but do you really believe that everybody who violates the law is a terrorist? You sound like Barack Obama. For goodness sakes. You think the Hammonds were terrorists because they supposedly set fires? You think setting a fire is terrorism? Yeah, my question for you is, when you read the definition of terrorism, were you drunk? So anyway.
Do you want his most latest comment?
Sure.
He says, look up the definition of terrorism right now and tell me that's not what is going on in Oregon.
I'm telling you what's going on in Oregon. I'll look it up. I'll make you a deal. You're so dumb, okay? You're so stupid.
Read it right now.
I will. I'll make you a deal. I'll read it right now. If, when you're wrong, you will publicly admit I was wrong. I'm waiting for his answer.
He hasn't replied yet.
Come on.
Get a dictionary.
I will go get a dictionary if you'll agree to these terms. If you're wrong, you will admit publicly that you're wrong. If not, I'm not going to waste my time with you. You're not helping the cause of liberty.
I haven't seen anything yet.
Stupid people shut up fast when you call their bluff.
Are you carrying right now? He says absolutely.
Oh, he says absolutely. Good. Let's go do it. If you want to come to Liberty Reef and find out if I'm carrying, I'll leave that up to you. All right, here you go, smartass. Terrorism. Which definition do you want? I don't even care which one we'll use. I'll pick up. You want we'll use the FBI's definition, and we'll use Merriam-Webster. How about that? Just random. Okay. Merriam-Webster says the use of violent acts to frighten the people in an area as a way of trying to achieve a political goal. All right. So first of all, you have to have a use of violent acts. Okay? There was no violent act here. There was no one at the refuge. Okay? Violence, in this context, means violence against a person. Matter of fact, if you go to the next section down, it says the systematic use of terror, especially as a means of coercion. You're not coercing property. For it to be terrorism, you have to be trying to coerce a person. Okay? With a violent act. So there was no one there to commit a violent act against. The second thing, to frighten people. Okay, these people aren't trying to frighten anybody. Did you watch the video explaining what they were doing and why they were doing it? They're not brandishing weapons. They were holding the Constitution in the flag. Who is scared? They're 20 miles away from civilization. There's no one in the area. There's no federal employees there. So who in the world was subject to a violent act? Who in the world... Now, and again, it has to be with the intent to frighten. Now, just because you're a wimpy, dumbass, obnoxious person, maybe not you, but your brother, that doesn't mean it's terrorism. I mean, you could be afraid of anything. You're probably afraid of me over this podcast, okay? That's not terrorism. It has to have the intent. The people have to be intentionally using violent acts to frighten people in an area as a way of trying to achieve a political goal, okay? The use of violent acts to achieve a political goal. I will give you a challenge. Now, we'll look up one more. We'll look up the FBI's. But why don't you look up civil disobedience? It's a little homework assignment for you. Compare and contrast the definitions of terrorism versus civil disobedience. Okay, here's the second definition I told you we'd use. Okay, legally, the FBI references 18 USC, which stands for United States Code, section 2331, that defines international terrorism and domestic terrorism. Okay, and we're going to leave international terrorism because I assume you don't think that Oregon is international. So we'll go down to domestic terrorism. Okay, means activities with the following three characteristics. Number one, involve acts dangerous to human life that violate federal or state law. Okay, you can't name one thing these people have done by themselves that was an act dangerous to human life. Because the only people that were there were these people you're critical of. Second, appear intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Their actions aren't directed at a civilian population. Their actions are directed at redress from their government. They've written a petition for redress. They have sent letters. They have talked with people. Again, I'm not defending what they've done. I'm simply showing you it's no way, shape, or form terrorism. Okay? The third one, to influence the policy. Oh, so this is still the second bullet point. Or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Okay, there's no mass destruction going on here. There's no assassination going on here, and there's no kidnapping. So here's what you will do. Here's what the non-thinking novices do. They'll say, wait a minute, but they're trying to affect the conduct of a government. Yes, but you go back to the beginning. It has to be intimidation and coercion of a civilian population to influence the policy of a government. In other words, you're using the civilian population as a pawn. You're making the civilians scared to try to change government policy. So if you were to hold people hostage in a movie theater and demand that the government take action, that's terrorism. When you're up at a wildlife refuge, eating beans and citing the Constitution, you're not intimidating or coercing a civilian population. I challenge you to find any support in the law for that position. Number three, it occurs primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. I will admit that these guys' actions have occurred primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. And now 2332B defines the term federal crime of terrorism as an offense that is calculated to influence or affect the conduct of government or to retaliate against government conduct and is a violation of one of several listed statutes related to killing or attempted killing during an attack on a federal facility with a dangerous weapon. Okay, so I don't know who you are, but I challenge you now to keep your word and admit you were wrong. Yeah. All right, so any other questions? Any other comments, Kimball?
I was not wrong.
Oh, really? Why weren't you wrong? So defend yourself then. Use the definition that you told me to go look up.
Somebody says, what the hell is going on?
I'm debating with a numbskull. We'll get out of that debate in a minute, but you cannot be afraid, my friends.
The use of violence and intimidation in pursuit of political aims.
No, but it's two parts. There's a connection. To intimidate or coerce a civilian population. And who are they intimidating? Violence or intimidation directed towards whom? There are no people up there.
You can't just make stuff up to fit your theory.
Okay, who are they intimidating?
Read the definition verbatim.
I just did. Who are they intimidating? Who have they acted violently against?
Nothing yet.
Who? Give me the name of a person they have directly intimidated or acted violently against.
They're using intimidation in pursuit of political aims.
Intimidating who? Who are they intimidating? Who?
If they're not trying to intimidate people, why bring guns?
No, don't change the question. Who are they intimidating? Deer? Moose?
They're intimidating park rangers.
The park rangers specifically said they weren't going up there.
They're trying to intimidate the government.
Who's the government? The government's not up there. They didn't use force against any government. They didn't pull a gun on anybody. Here's your argument. Here's where you really need to think this through. You're saying that the possession of weapons by itself, when no other people are involved, is an act of intimidation. Because I have a gun, right? Because I have a gun right here, are you intimidated? I have a gun for the purpose of defending my property.
His argument is the definition of terrorism. He's not answering your questions.
All right, done with you. Goodbye. All right, my friends. So let's go into a little bit less contention. Since you guys don't have questions, let me take how many people we have on Periscope right now.
60.
All right. So let's talk about what's going on up in Oregon, because this guy who I'm debating with, whoever it is, let me break this down for some of you, because you all have brothers or neighbors like this person. They want to debate with you about what exists in their imagination, not what exists in fact. Okay? And this is how the freedom movement gets played by the media. Let me give you an example. The story is that armed militiamen took over federal building, and that there was an ongoing siege. Okay? That creates this rhetorical image that causes everybody to get scared. Holy crap, a bunch of white guys with guns, and we use mean words like took over federal building. They're like Timothy McVeigh. Holy crap. No, Timothy McVeigh loaded fertilizer bombs into a truck and parked it in front of a building full of civilians and blew it up. That's wickedness. These people went and camped and ate pork and beans at a public refuge where there's no law, by the way, against camping. The only crime they have possibly committed, based on the facts so far, is they have entered that building and slept in it. Used its electricity. And I'm not even sure, if you look very carefully at the law, I'm not even sure that's a crime. It's probably an infraction like a speeding ticket, because it's a public wildlife refuge. You can go up there too, anytime you want. Now, let's back up. You have to get really clear about what this isn't. It's not a siege. Okay, we're talking about definitions, Kimball. You look up, you know what a siege is? A siege is when a force, a military or a weaponized force who is in war, reaches a population of soldiers and usually civilians that they can't conquer, so they surround them and keep them from leaving and cut off their supplies and try to win the battle through attrition over time. It's what the government tried to do at Waco. The siege is when you surround a building, a fortification, or an area, and you trap your enemies inside. And you start cutting them off from supplies, hoping they will give up. This is not a siege. There was no one in the building. Bundy and his friends weren't holding anybody hostage. They're not trying to beat anyone through attrition. What's probably happening right now, if you looked at the news reports, facts, the government says they're going to cut off cell phone reception, they're going to cut off water and power, and they're going to start to surround these protesters, and it would be the government who converted this into a siege. Okay? So the first thing is, it's not a siege. Number two, it was not an armed takeover. Okay? The news has reported that this was an armed takeover. I have searched, my friends, I've read every published article in the national news media that I can find. Every major publication, the Washington Post, Washington Times, New York Post, New York Times, LA Times, Denver Post, Wall Street Journal, the magazines, The Atlantic, the New Republic. I've read the liberal ones, I've read the conservative ones. There's no evidence, none, that these guys went up there and used weapons to accomplish this. They simply went up there and started pitching tents and parking vehicles. That's important because it's like the difference if I walk into a convenience store and I steal something and leave versus if I walk into a convenience store and point a gun at the clerk and steal something and leave. The use of an armed exercise, the use of force through firearms to accomplish an aim is not what happened here. What they said was, we're here, we're going to stay here, we haven't hurt anyone, no one is in danger, but just so you know, we are armed, so please don't come upon us. Now think about that for a minute. It would be worse if they didn't announce that they were armed and pretended not to be armed like liberal hippies in a sit-in. And then if the government came to arrest them, they pulled out weapons and started shooting them, which, by the way, is what happened at Waco. Remember, when the government first got there and surrounded them and came with weapons drawn, the people at the Waco compound started shooting back and firing, and then you had the siege and the standoff. We live in a day and age where people don't know what terrorism is, people don't know what a siege is. We just let words float around as if they don't mean anything, but they do mean things. And in the cause of liberty, I have this problem on Facebook. A friend of mine recently, he just posts kind of random definitions. And you have to understand that a definition is both a description and a prescription. In other words, we get to choose whether we accept certain definitions. And what's happening right now in the public media is there's this battle to change the definition of terrorism. And say anytime someone does anything against the government, it's terrorism. Okay, that's this argument this other fellow had, right, that was on here. The idea that anytime anyone resists the government, it's terrorism. Right? There's only one way to resist the government. Ultimately, right? And that's force. Pushing away, running away. And we're in a day and age where the media is trying to create this narrative, and we're losing the narrative because we're not intellectually astute and articulate, and we let them get away with saying things like this is an armed takeover, this is a siege. And we don't pay attention to terms. And therefore we get manipulated. And the law gets manipulated. So you have to pay attention to what's really going on. Now, I actually personally, just to be completely transparent, I've tried to talk with Ammon. I've tried to reach out to, I've been in contact with several of his friends and several of the people up there. And I've been talking to them because, as you know, I've been in the liberty movement for a long time. And I've been trying to, number one, learn what their strategy and purpose is. And number two, I've been trying to talk to them about why I think this is a bad idea. I just don't think it's a good strategy. But they're lovers of liberty. They're our friends. We're in a war. And when you have a friend, a group of friends in, let's say, a battalion or a unit that's fighting on your side in the war, and they make a strategic mistake, you don't just go support the enemy. Okay? You work with your friends. And a lot of you are not you, but your neighbors, right? Your friends, and you're so immature. You don't understand. You don't publicly attack your friends in this battle for liberty because you disagree with them. Yeah?
People are all over wondering why you're calling it a war, saying we're not in a war. What are you talking about?
Really? We're not in a war. Okay. Well, words are important. Words are important. And I'll tell you why it's a war. Wars always have two phases. Wars always start as a battle of ideas that starts to lead to physical confrontation. And then once the battle of ideas ceases to produce acceptable results to one side or the other, it becomes a shooting war or a physical war. Every war. That's how they start. The American Revolution started off long before the first shots were fired. I mean, the reason, if you read the Declaration of Independence, for example, which is a great example to answer this question about what is a war, when you have a difference of ideas to the point, and Jefferson talks about when a long train of abuses, in other words, we have different ideas about how we should be treated. We have different ideas about how force is being used against us by government, for example. When you can't get protection through discourse, when the normal means of government and petitions start to fail so much that the evils that you're suffering are no longer sufferable, it goes from a war of words, okay, petitions, speeches, public rhetoric, publications, that becomes an intellectual war. And that starts to result, if you don't start making progress, if you can't think together and build intellectual bridges together, when you stop listening to each other, and one side has the ability, or both sides, at least one side has the ability to exercise force to back up their ideas, that intellectual war starts to become a physical war. And there becomes a point in time when one or both sides say, we are done talking. And that becomes a shooting war. Okay? We are not yet to a full-fledged bullet revolution. We are in the intellectual war. Okay? And it's starting to produce violence. Okay? And here's why it's a war. Because there are two dominant philosophies as to the proper role of government. And it's actually just a continuation of the war that began in the American Revolution. And here's the two different philosophies. One philosophy says that men are free by right to govern themselves, and they get their rights from nature, and nature's God. There's another philosophy that says, no, men must be governed by governments, and their rights come from the government. And the government, in its benevolence, has a job to serve its citizens by giving them rights and regulating their rights. Those are two different worldviews. Implementation of the Federal Reserve, and then from then on, the growth of government through Lyndon Johnson's administration, his war on poverty. What happened is the European view of government, which is what we had before the Revolution, right? The American colonies had a European form of government, which is that worldview that says men must be governed, whether it's through royalty, whether it's through oligarchy, whether it's through aristocracy, whether it's through moneyed interest, whatever it is. And the American Revolution was a war, first of ideas. This is, wait a minute, no, we have rights from God and from nature, and we're going to insist on better treatment. We're going to insist that you stop exercising force against us in violation of these basic principles. And John Locke, in his second treatise on government, is the one who kind of started that intellectual war. Okay? And the founders picked that up. Adam Smith also had a part in it. And what happened is, from about the 1740s, if you study history, from about the 1740s to the 1770s, we had the same thing. We had this growth, well, even 1720s, we had this growth in divisiveness where the European form of government, there everybody's just saying, well, we just need to petition the government. We need to get organized and work through the government. We need to keep working through the government. And the King of England and the government of England was just abusive and conscripting our people and imposing unjust financial restraints on trade and refusing to protect the rights of the subjects or citizens. And what happened is, when our verbal petitions, that verbal war reached a climax, you started getting publications advocating that people choose sides. Okay, that's when you know it's not just a discussion, that it's a war, it's an intellectual war, where you started to get public discourse by some of the very prominent leaders of the American Revolution suggesting, hey, you're either on our side or you're on their side. Because we've now coalesced into mutually exclusive ideas. That's a war of words. And once that coalescing to mutually exclusive ideas starts to happen, there starts to be violence because the one side starts to say, well, you're not listening to me, so I'm just going to do what I want. And when that violence starts to happen, everybody starts to pick sides very quickly. Who's right, who's wrong, whose side am I on, whose side am I on? And then what happens is, and sometimes these happen over weeks, sometimes it happens over months, sometimes it happens over years, you get to a shooting war where people start to say, well, if you keep acting the way you're acting, I'm just going to shoot you. Just stay away from me. And there's always aggressors in war and defenders in war. And the answer to the question, the reason we're at war is we've now had a coalescing of views where there are people who now, in our government and in our citizenry, are very clearly on one side or the other. There's a bunch of people in the middle. But that divisiveness and that polarization is continuing to the point where it's now causing violence. And it's happening on both the left and the right. You're having the Black Lives Matter, the Occupy movements, the Campus Occupy movements on one side. You're having the libertarian right-wing situations like what's happening up in Oregon. And you know, it's not just there. It's this idea that we can't go on. And so we call it a war. One of my heroes, J. Reuben Clark, said in 1940 it had become an intellectual war. And he said, and if we can't win this intellectual war, we will have to once again shed blood for the cause of liberty. And see, that's why it's so bad when people who love liberty aren't effective at controlling the narrative. What's so bad about people who love liberty who can't defend it, who can't articulate a defense of it. And we're going to talk a little bit more about legal issues, but once the people on the side of liberty can't defend themselves with words anymore, it becomes a shooting war. And when I started this call, or started this Periscope, I said we're reaching a new stage where literally, think about this. You have people up in Scott Walker's state who occupied the Capitol building, with weapons, by the way, to protest his position on unions. We didn't call in the federal government. We didn't, because they were left-wingers. We had to occupy Wall Street, that occupied parks and public spaces and government buildings and government streets and city blocks and city buildings. In most cases, we didn't call in the federal government. Very rarely, towards the end, we started to call in the local government. We have the Occupy campus movements and the Black Lives Matter movements where they're taking over in populated areas through force, expelling white people, expelling conservatives, expelling libertarians. And that's part of this intellectual war. But you see, as soon as you have someone who advocates for liberty, there's probably a couple dozen fellows up there, 20 miles away from anybody, out in a wildlife refuge, the left starts saying, kill them. See, it wasn't it wasn't Ammon Bundy who said, if you come up here, I'm going to kill you. Matter of fact, you want to talk about facts for a minute? We were just watching this live stream, it looks like it's over now. There's been some warrants issued for the arrests of some of these protesters. And instead of saying, if you come up here, I'm going to shoot you, one of the individuals who had a warrant out from his arrest says, all right, I'm going to separate myself from the camp, and I'm going to start a fire out here, and I'm going to sleep out here, so if you want to come and arrest me, I'm right here, and you can come and get me, and you don't have to bother these other people who you don't have an arrest warrant for. That's not violence, my friends. That's protest. That's civil disobedience, and you might disagree with them. But it's not like Occupy Wall Street. And the fact that there are serious people who think the government should use physical force to settle this intellectual debate means we're at war. We're at war. And that war is going to escalate and escalate until it becomes more and more of a shooting war. I hope we can de-escalate it. The reason I'm on Periscope is to teach basic principles, to sound an alarm, and to wake people up to think intelligently and strategically so that we can de-escalate the physical violence and be more effective. See, I'm pro-government. You have to understand, I think the founders gave us a system that we can still use to this day to win this war. It becomes a non-violent political contest rather than a war. And I think we can use the legitimate forms of government still to this day without resorting to violence in almost all cases. One of the reasons I disagree with what Ammon has done up there is because it's provocative. Okay, I'm not saying it's terroristic, but it's provocative because what you're essentially saying is to the government, who you know is in an era of overreach, who is in an era of excessive militarism, that's in an era of lack of principled limitation, you're saying to them, I dare you, almost. I dare you to come and do something. And it was unnecessary. I mean, in other words, they weren't protecting life or liberty. They were protesting. And I think they were too provocative to be effective. And so I think it was too reckless. Now, they're my friends. They're on the side of liberty. They are on the right side of the war. And so I will tell you, if the government uses excessive force and kills anyone unnecessarily up there, I will be defending the protesters. Because unless the protesters are the aggressors, unless the protesters initiate violence against some person, there is no reason for this. And, somebody said to me, it's wintertime. If I were the sheriff, first of all, I can't believe the sheriff hasn't even gone up there to talk to them. I mean, I can't believe the government. Ugh, okay, anyway, have I answered the question about why I call it a war?
Yeah, two questions. The only two comments I've really seen worth addressing. Someone says, "Who is England? If this is a war like the Revolutionary War, who are we fighting? Who's the England?"
Well, you have to remember, when we started the Revolutionary War, we were all England. The colonies were part of England, and we fought for a long time inside the power structures to still be England. And there reached a point where a small number of people, about 4 men, finally declared their independence and said, okay, we can't be part of you anymore. They seceded, if you will, from England. So we haven't reached that point yet. We haven't reached the point where we are going to have a shooting war. That's what I'm trying to avoid. That's what a lot of people who love liberty are trying to avoid. We can win this with the technology, the tools we have, the access to information we have, the ability to organize and be effective. We don't have to declare our independence from the United States. Right now, we are all Americans. And the war right now, the intellectual war, is to reform and repair and restore the proper role of our government. It's still our government. That's the mistake that a lot of people in the liberty movement are making it. They're saying it's us versus them. And let me give you an example. Well, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. You know what? Let me, for the sake of not being long-winded, I've got an outline of some ideas that I want to share in a more logical sequence to talk about strategy. Because the real question here is, what do we do? Okay? If you really want to win in the cause of liberty, the question is, what do we do? And quite frankly, I think one of the reasons Ammon and his friends up there are there is because we can't do nothing. Doing nothing is not an option. And so a lot of people are erring on the side of, well, let's just do something. But in doing something, we've got to be smart. So I want to talk about what we can do to win this war without it becoming a shooting war. Because I'm telling you, my friends, on this current trajectory, there will be blood. On this current trajectory, there will be blood. And it will increase unless the lovers of liberty start to follow basic principles, sound strategies, and organize effectively. The American Revolution would have never been possible if a very diverse group of people who loved liberty didn't unite in principle. And matter of fact, they would have been more effective if they would united earlier. That's a whole different discussion. But we are Americans, and this is our government. The federal government is not them; it's us. And we should be pissed when people in our government abuse power. And we should be forceful and passionate in advocating intelligently and smartly to get rid of those in power who are tyrants, who are bureaucratic commissars. And we've got to do it. And here's the what I want to talk to Ammon about is there are effective ways to get tyrants out of power. whether they're bureaucrats, whether they're judges, whether they're executives, and we've got to get good at that. The only way to avoid a shooting war is we've got to get the tyrants, the bureaucrats, the unprincipled leaders out of power. And it's not through the ballot box right now. It's not about campaigning for this presidential candidate. You've bought into that myth or lie, and that's how the enemies of freedom have grown. And that's how they've continued to infiltrate our government and continue to advocate for overreach. So I'm going to talk about strategically, how do we win? What should Ammon do? What should you do? What should I do to win? Because let me just tell you, if you haven't seen this, Kimball, zoom in on this. If you haven't seen KrisAnne Hall's video on YouTube, you can go to our Free Capitalist group on Facebook and you can watch it. It's just a 9-minute video. And KrisAnne is a constitutional lawyer who does a very good job of explaining what the real issues are and explaining why the federal government's land policy is unconstitutional and why this is not about the Bundys and why this is not about the Hammonds and why this is not about any personality, but what it really is about in terms of this principled battle for the supreme law of the land and for real constitutional liberty. I highly recommend you listen to KrisAnne, and she'll explain. She's very articulate, and I won't take the time here on this Periscope to repeat what she said. She gives a very articulate defense of what the legal and moral issue is behind this protest. So again, let me be very clear. I am in 100% agreement with Ammon Bundy on what the principle is behind his protest. He is right that the federal government's land policy, particularly in the West, through the Forest Service, through the BLM, is tyrannical, it's unprincipled, in some cases it's nefarious, in some cases some of the employees who have infiltrated these federal offices are mean, wicked, self-dealing, vindictive, agenda-oriented, anti-freedom people who are literally at war with the idea of the American West and the American way of life. And because of that, there's a problem. We need to fix the problem. And that tyranny has grown like a cancer inside the Forest Service, inside the BLM. And what we've got to do is realize, again, the enemy isn't the federal government. The enemy are these people who get into these positions of power and refuse to be governed by the Constitution of the United States and by the constitutional laws of the United States. So KrisAnne does a great job. Shout out to KrisAnne Hall for her awesome explanation of what's going on there. Highly recommend that to all of you. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, let me just go through real quick. I want to back up here for a minute because, well, I'm going to leave the Obama gun grab for a little bit later. How many followers? We still got people that going to sleep? We still got
There's 43 on right now. Yeah.
All right, great. So I want to talk about Ammon Bundy for a minute and what's going on up in Oregon, because a lot of people like you, Kimball, who've been celebrating the holidays and maybe they're not dialed into kind of what's happened here. And I want to talk about what lessons can liberty lovers learn from what's going on right now. The first lesson is being right is not enough. You have got to be able to tell a story, to tell a narrative, to get other people to see the right. You can't, in a free society, being right isn't a matter of self-righteousness. It's not a matter of say, well, I know the answer. I know what the Constitution really means. There's no private righteousness in a political cause. If you're right, and you see principles being violated, if you see human rights being violated, you have a moral obligation to advocate for the truth and for the right. Which means being right's just the first step. Knowing that something's wrong and what the right thing is just the first step. The next step is you've got to tell a narrative. You've got to tell a story that's compelling. And one of the problems with the situation with the Hammonds for the last 10 years, and with Ammon's involvement and the other freedom movements, they did not focus on an effective narrative. And I'll tell you why. Okay, for those of you who don't understand, I'm just going to give you a quick backstory. So the Hammonds are ranchers. And some of you don't know. See, I live in a ranching community. Up here at Liberty Reef, I'm the only, well, Kimball now, we're the only well, except for there's a couple retired families, I guess. But we're the only working age population citizenry in this community that aren't ranchers. And if you don't understand ranching in the western part of the United States doesn't generally occur only on private land. It generally also involves the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management and grazing issues. And for about 70 or 80 years, there has been a growing debate over the federal government's use of land, particularly out here in the Rocky Mountain West. There's a debate about whether they have the right to it. There's a debate about whether, even if they do have a right to it, whether they're using it justly. And a lot of ranchers in the ranching industry have been battling a growing bureaucracy. Now, we don't have time to go into the details, but you need to understand that. So the Hammonds are a family that, for decades, have been battling a growing bureaucracy who is making it more and more difficult for them to do what they do. Whether you agree with that or not is a different story. You need to understand there's a history of conflict. Over 10 years ago, in 2000, I think it's early 2001, somewhere around there, and around 2006, there were some controversies over the Hammonds starting some fires that burned on both their land and on BLM land that they had rights to. And there were some allegations by the federal government that the Hammonds were engaged in illegal poaching. There were allegations by the Hammonds that government bureaucrats were being unjust and trying to steal their land, trying to violate their rights, etc. And so this was not a new conflict. This was a war. This was an intellectual war. Okay? And the government started to exercise force. And the Hammonds protested. And what ended up happening is the federal government went to the state government, the local government, and said, we want you to prosecute the Hammonds for these fires to cover up poaching and that put our lives at risk. And the local prosecutors investigated this situation and decided no crime had occurred. And so they didn't prosecute them. And this is what's happened. This is, for those of you who want a lesson of Tyranny 101, and you want to talk about a war, one of the places where most freedom lovers are brain off and they don't realize what's happening is tyranny right now is being the tip of the spear, if you will, in tyranny in our government is with the United States attorneys and federal prosecutors. Because you have to understand, the Constitution of the United States doesn't deal with United States attorneys. The Constitution, the founders never imagined United States attorneys. Permanent prosecutors. And United States attorneys and their staff in all the federal districts get to make the decision for the executive branch of the government who to prosecute, when to prosecute, how to prosecute. And tyranny right now is very realistically being implemented day in and day out by unprincipled, overzealous, and unprincipled prosecutors. And so what happened is you had these federal bureaucrats who were upset at the Hammonds, and they couldn't get the local government to prosecute them, so they went to their friends in the United States Attorney's Office, and the United States Attorney agreed to prosecute the Hammonds. My friends, just put an asterisk by this. If you want to stand up and defend liberty and fight for freedom, you've got to get dialed in about how we can legally and lawfully hold corrupt and overreaching United States attorneys in their offices accountable. Because most people have no idea even that they exist. Most people have no idea how they exist. Most people have no idea what their budgets are, how they get appointed, why they get appointed, who does the appointing, and the politics involved. And how executive policy is exploding in its overreach through these prosecutors because they're given almost completely unchecked discretion to prosecute citizens like the Hammonds. And so they prosecuted the Hammonds under the Terrorism and Death Penalty Act. And to charge them with arson, they had to use this terrorism statute, and they charged them and took them to trial. And here's another lesson. I hate to say this, but you want to know the truth, it's the truth. The Hammonds did not have good legal representation. And one of the problems we have in the liberty movement, my friends, is people who love liberty have kind of contempt for attorneys. And they have kind of contempt for the courts. But that's where an individual man an individual woman can stand up to defend their liberty. It's in a court of law. Let me take a segue and show you something. Some of you have been watching. How many? We still got some people on Periscope, Kimball?
50.
Let me show you something. Nobody's telling you this about the federal overreach with Barack Obama today with his guns. I'm going to teach you this, and you need to spread the word, my friends. And I'm going to teach you a principle that can revolutionize what you do in the cause of liberty. Barack Obama just announced the passing of some new actions. Some people call them executive orders. It's broader than just executive orders. And one of the things that he has done is he has demanded that federal law enforcement take a broader view of existing law regarding gun dealers, and background checks. Right now, under existing law, there's a requirement that certain people have a federal license to sell firearms. And part of that, it's very expensive to get, very, very cumbersome to comply with. And then part of the duties of license holders is to do background checks before they sell weapons, before they sell certain firearms. And some people are exempt from that because, if I just am sitting here with Kimball and I say, hey, Kimball, I've got a gun right here. You want it? Here, I'll sell it to you. I need some cash. I can do that without a license, and I can do that without a background check. And so some people call that a loophole, like a gun show loophole, or all this kind of thing. And what Barack Obama has done is he's just given a directive for federal law enforcement agents, ATF agents, likewise FBI agents, etc., to interpret that law and apply that law so that anyone who sells or gives away a gun, even just one gun, could potentially be considered a dealer or in the business of selling firearms, and therefore requiring a dealer's license and therefore requiring background checks. And it's a big lie. The lie is that what Barack Obama thinks is that if we had more background checks, we'd have a safer society. But you see, the law, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here because I want to get back to the Bundys, but I want to show you something. If you read very carefully what the Department of Justice said today, what the Attorney General said today, and what Barack Obama said today, when asked, well, who is a dealer? Who is required to get these licenses? They said, well, we want to keep it vague so that law enforcement has proper tools to look at the totality of the situation. But what that really means is we don't want to put citizens on notice with a bright line so they know whether they're breaking the law or not. We want to be able to decide after the fact that a certain transaction was constituting a business or the sale, the unlicensed sale of a firearm, so that a person doesn't ever know for sure whether they've broken the law until federal prosecutors decide whether to charge them. And what this really is, my friends, and you don't see this, and for some of you who are kind of lost in all my words, let me just break it down for you and make it really simple. What they just did is gave unlimited enforcement authority to United States attorneys to prosecute anyone who has given or sold a firearm to anyone. And the purpose of that is not to get more background checks. The purpose of that is to be able to bring the power of federal prosecution down on people who you want to control or influence. And let me give you an example. The Hammonds, going back to a different situation, the Hammonds were a thorn in the side of the federal government because they weren't giving up their land. And so the government prosecuted them. The government never thought that the Hammonds would take this all the way to trial. As a matter of fact, they strategized for years to just put pressure on the Hammonds and threaten to prosecute them. And that's the way tyranny works, is you threaten citizens and you say, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to prosecute you. And the Hammonds had courage, and they went to court, and they fought, but they did not have good legal representation. They went through trial, and they did not have an effective trial strategy. And they really were dissatisfied with how the court treated their case. They really felt prejudiced by the way the court treated their case. And when the matter was submitted to the jury, the Hammonds were scared that they were possibly going to be convicted, even though they thought that they were innocent. And here's what happened. The federal government came to them, prosecutors came to them and said, we'll make a deal with you. And the Hammonds entered into a plea bargain with them. And the Hammonds agreed to plead guilty. The story out there is this is not true. If you actually read the court documents and what happened, a jury did not convict them as a kind of normal trial conviction. The Hammonds, while the jury was out, the jury had reached a verdict on one count or two and not on others. And while the jury was still deliberating, what happened is the federal government came to the Hammonds, and the Hammonds naively, glibly, sadly, entered into a plea bargain. And people who love liberty need to understand, when the government offers you a plea bargain, it requires that you voluntarily waive certain rights or protections that you have. And that's what the Hammonds did. And the Hammonds did it based on false assurances from prosecutors, who are immune from prosecution, by the way. They can lie, you can't do anything about it. They can cheat, you can't do anything about it. They can even engage in prosecutorial misconduct, you can do very little about it. But what happened is, so then when the Hammonds got sentenced, the federal judge who oversaw the trial said it was a great tragedy that this conviction was so disproportionate to what had actually happened. There was a statutory minimum of 5 years under this Terrorism Act, and he said, I can't do it. It would be a miscarriage of justice. It would be abusive. It would be a violation of the right that free citizens have against cruel and unusual punishment. And so the federal judge says, I can't do it. I'm sentencing one of them to a few months and one of them to almost a year. And so he deviated downward from the statutory requirement of 5 years. And the Hammonds, because they plea bargained, and they knew that was what kind of was going to happen. They knew that based on what had come out, even though it was bad, they had this philosophy that a lot of people in the liberty movement have been trained, taught, and educated to buy into, and it's horrible. It empowers tyrants like you wouldn't believe. Well, we better take our licks now. We better just comply with the law. We just better assent. We can't win. We're accused of wrongdoing. They plea bargained, and they didn't have the money to fight anymore. They were being heavily trod upon by an overreaching prosecutor. And this is the problem with vague laws that Congress passes with good intentions. The federal judge in this case said, I cannot believe, and if you read the record, the federal judge says, I cannot believe this is what Congress had in mind when it passed this law. This federal judge, Article 3 judge, said, I cannot believe it. And so the Hammonds went to prison. They ascended, they went to prison, they did their time. But the U.S. attorney didn't like it, and the U.S. attorney appealed. And it went to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals came back and said that the federal judge did not have legal authority to deviate from the law that Congress passed. See, this is not the judge's fault. This was not even the Ninth Circuit's fault, even though a lot of them really dropped the ball here. Congress had passed this law, one of these, overreaching laws, and required, despite the facts and circumstances, that the minimum penalty is 5 years. And so it wasn't double jeopardy because the Hammonds weren't put on trial twice. They weren't tried twice for the same crime. They were convicted. They were sentenced. The prosecutors appealed their sentence. It was unjust. But the argument is not Sixth Amendment, or the argument is not the provision against double jeopardy. The argument is actually due process, my friends. The Hammonds were denied due process because it was unfair. And what happened is after they'd served their prison sentence and got back to their lives, the government, the prosecutors won the appeal. The matter got remanded to the district court. The original judge had retired. The new judge sentenced them and required them to go back to prison for 5 years with credit for time served. The reason I spend all that time explaining that to you, there were two problems here. During that whole time, the Hammonds lost the battle of the narrative. Because the Hammonds, in their legal filings and through their court processes, they did not succeed at painting the whole story. Matter of fact, by the time the trial came along, a huge amount of evidence was excluded that could have helped them and could have exonerated them because they didn't know how, and their attorneys weren't very skilled at presenting that narrative in court to win. And the second thing that happened is the Hammonds got scared and plea bargained and gave up rights. And one of the rights, the Hammonds thought that one of the terms of the plea bargain was that the government waived its right to appeal the sentence. But then the government
when they appealed, they said, "Oh no, that's not what we meant to do." And the Ninth Circuit came out and said, "Yeah, actually, there's no provision in the rules related to plea bargains where the government gives up its right to appeal." And so what happened is the Hammonds said, "Well, wait a minute, we wouldn't have agreed to the deal we got if we would have known that the prosecutors were lying." That's the point, my friends. You've got to learn how to fight. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this? It's a lesson the freedom movement has got to learn soon and deeply. Gotta create a narrative that's going to win the support of other principled, liberty-minded people. It's important. Number two, you've got to learn how to fight in the legal system in advance. And you cannot give up your rights and then later think you're going to have protections. And that's what a plea bargain is. I've seen that happen so many times. Now, next, we're going to talk about legal strategy more in a minute. Here's another lesson, and I mean this with all due respect. Calls to action do not work to win this war. See, what's happening here, and lovers of liberty have been deceived by a few isolated successes, because liberty-minded people don't organize nearly as well as collectivist-minded people. What's happened is we've got a lot of kind of liberty activists who are very vocal, but they're small in number. And when the Clive and Bundy situation happened back a couple years ago, you had hundreds of people show up, and they were kind of what I call traveling liberty mercenaries. And they had an isolated success. But you have to understand, tyranny right now is everywhere. The overreach is everywhere. Every United States Attorney's Office, and in most states, their Attorney General's office and their district attorney prosecutors, that's where tyranny is implemented. Okay? And there just aren't enough liberty-minded activists to go fight all these battles. And so what happens is, you get a situation where Ammon goes up to Oregon, and he puts out multiple calls to action and says, "Lovers of liberty everywhere, come help us, come help us, come help us." But there's no political power in activist mercenaries for liberty. It only works for the enemy. Here's why. Because liberty requires constant restraint. Tyranny only requires isolated violations and overreaches. So our enemies can be traveling mercenaries. Our enemies are the liberal socialists and the collectivists and the statists. They only have to win here and there, and once they win and they support this government overreach, they get precedent on their side, and it starts to erode freedom. And so in the battle, we've kind of tried to mimic these socialists and the communists and the Saul Alinsky style approach, but you see, we have to be permanent. Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. That's the cliche statement. We've got to be able to check tyranny all the time. And so the problem is with Ammon, that's why he tried to say, in my opinion, that, hey, we're going to be here for the long haul. But you see a call to action, kind of these ad hoc liberty committees, they can never win because they can never outlast the tyrants. There's just not enough of us. It's why the founders ultimately, and most people don't learn this about the history of the American Revolution, it's why the founders went back to their individual states and modified their state constitutions, particularly Virginia, Massachusetts. There were a couple others, but they had to make sure that there were structures in place in their states that could hold the tyranny of a potential federal tyranny in check. And so my warning to liberty-minded people is, you can't have something for nothing. You can't expect the Ammon Bundys of the world to win for you. And some of you say, well, I don't expect Ammon to win. I'm for Promise Keepers, and we were against it, or Oath Keepers. We were against this. Oath Keepers cannot, Promise Keepers cannot, none of the 3% organization cannot win for us. I'm glad those organizations exist. They're doing great. I'm not advocating that you don't participate or strengthen those organizations. I'm advocating that's just the beginning. We've got to have a smarter strategy, a more permanent strategy. And I'm going to talk about what that is in just a second. Lessons learned.
Someone just said you're a smooth talker for a rancher.
I said I'm not a rancher. I live in a ranching community.
I think it's the hat. You threw him off.
I am a cowboy. I'm just not a rancher. Up here in Oregon, we've got, okay, again, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, here's a problem. Let's say that the circumstances were such that you did agree with them. Let's say they were protecting his innocent life. Let's say they were let's say whatever has to happen, let's say they were right. A couple dozen guys can't stop even a city government, because government is organized force, and an ad hoc group of liberty lovers will always lose to organized force. It's like if you watch NFL football, an organized, effective, synchronized strategy will always beat talent that's not organized and strategically arranged. And so we can't win with dozens. We can't win with hundreds. And you know, it's the Ron Paul problem. When Ron Paul came to my office several years ago and we talked about, this was before he was setting up the Campaign for Liberty, and we had the Free Capitalist Project going, and we talked about what he was preparing to do with the Campaign for Liberty. I told him, I said, I love it, I support it, but you got a problem. You can't win delegates to become the President of the United States with an organization of liberty-minded people spread out all over the country. With the internet, you can get fundraising, you can get attention, you can get eyeballs, you can get notice, you can get media. But see, that's a... You guys, there's so much to talk about. But that's such a bad idea. It's from our parents. It's the fallacy of the baby boomers. Because the baby boomers came of age with the power of the traditional media. And to a baby boomer, there are two ways to get power: money and FaceTime on the media. And so there's a whole generation of post-World War II leaders now who think that the way to win these battles is to have access to a widespread fundraising mechanism and a bunch of FaceTime in the media. It's not true. And sorry, Donald Trump's going to find this out. Asterisk, different conversation. Political power is geographic in nature. And real power to resist tyranny is organized in townships, in communities, and in counties. And that takes hundreds of thousands of liberty-loving people. But here's the good news. There are hundreds of thousands of liberty-loving people. But they don't want to get in an airplane and go up to Oregon. They don't want to get in an RV and go up to Oregon. They either don't have the money to do it, they don't have the time to do it, they're mad at Oath Keepers, they're mad at Bundys, they don't think it's the right call. We fight each other and fight each other and fight each other because, here's the point, in liberty, you can't organize first for this large collectivist movement and leave hollowed out movements at the county and at the community and at the neighborhood levels. But see, people who love liberty, they only have like 5 friends, that also love liberty, and so they get discouraged and they think, well, I've got to unite with people in California and people in Oregon and people in Florida, and we do, but that's just the beginning. We've got to be more strategically organized. And I'll talk about how in just a second. What time is it? 11 o'clock. Well, hang with me, because I'm just going to keep dishing it out, my friends. We still got people on there?
11:17, you got 57, more than you had last
All
time
right.
you asked.
Well, here's the deal, man. This is like Liberty Activism 101, okay? For those of you who don't know my story, you have to know I have battled the federal government. I have battled tyrants in the federal government for years. I've risked my life. I've risked my fortune. I have risked my family. And, my reputation, my honor was trashed by tyrants in the federal government. But I thank God for good men and women who upheld the principles in the federal government. I was able to win. And we've got to win. We are not lovers of liberty if we just want to go down in flaming glory so we can die and hope to meet a God and say, well, God, I went down fighting for righteousness. Because quite frankly, God wants people to win. And God wanted the founding fathers to win. That's what Cleon Skousen talked about, the miracle of America, is we won. The miracle was self-government won. The miracle was that freedom won. We can win, my friends. But let me tell you, there's a huge hole right now in your thinking and in most people in the liberty movement's thinking about how to win. And it's your fault. It's my fault. We have been trained, taught, and educated to think that the way to win is to vote the right people into power. In our 3 branches of government, the weakest is the legislative branch of government. Most people don't realize that. They pass laws they don't even read. They are influenced by bureaucrats, by corporations, by all kinds of. But most elected officials are not that smart, and because they're just average, like me and you. And what I mean by that, when I say they're not that smart, I don't mean they're bad men and women. I mean that there's a permanent bureaucracy and a permanent institutional power structure that outmaneuvers them and outflanks them all the time. They don't even know. Legislators, I have many, many friends, state, local, and federal legislators, many, many friends. Many of them have come to me for years and years and years for advice, for money. And they all have benevolent intentions. But you have to understand, and you know this, there are powerful, powerful interests behind the legislature. And there are very few legislators in every legislative body that control most of the power. Take, for example, Rand Paul, who's just now hopefully going to get a vote after a decade of his father and him advocating for an audit the Fed bill. They're going to get it voted on for the first time. Because they're huge, powerful. I mean, just think, they've had to advocate with the support of the Campaign for Liberty and other liberty-minded people. They've had to advocate for 10 years just to get a bill voted on once. And there's hundreds of thousands of reforms that must take place. We just have no chance. It's like, liberty lovers remind me of little boys with hatchets, and there's 30 of them, and they think they're going to go cut down the redwood forest before tomorrow at midnight, It's just futile. It's ridiculous. We've got to be more powerful. We've got to be more strategic. We've got to be smarter. And here's how we do it. We've got to get rid of this illusion that we're going to win this war by voting for the right people. I don't care if you vote for Rand Paul. I don't care if you vote for Ted Cruz. I don't care if you vote for Donald Trump. It is going to make absolutely zero difference in the ultimate trajectory. I don't care who you vote for the United States Senate. I don't care who you vote for the House of Representatives. Look what's happened for the last 70 years. The freedom movement has ebbed and flowed. But we have consistently lost to growing government, unprincipled government, growing overreach. Why? Okay, I'm going to tell you what nobody has told you. Probably. If you know this, you're light years ahead of the average person. Because they don't teach you this in school. That's why government schools don't teach you, by the way. And your parents, the baby boomers, probably didn't know this. The check against tyranny that every single citizen has a moral obligation to engage in is in the courtroom. And you don't want to hear this, but I'm telling you. Let me give you an example. I'm going to go back to the gun control issue. Everybody says, in the liberty movement, I can't believe Barack Obama's doing this with the guns. And Paul Ryan's talking about, oh my gosh, this is horrible. We're going to have to pass legislation to fix this. And, the RNC is trying to pacify us and say, we're going to consider impeachment. Baloney. They're just putting that out there to pacify libertarian and Tea Party and conservative people so that they don't revolt and we don't have more Bundys up in Oregon. That's all they're trying to do. And we don't have more support for Donald Trump. That's what they're trying to do. Here's the problem. The laws or the orders, the executive orders, the regulations that the federal government is perpetuating are unconstitutional. Most people don't realize this. There's only one way to invalidate an unconstitutional law, and that's to fight it in court. Okay, there's only one way without guns to beat back tyranny, and that's when the government comes to you, Kimball, and says, hey, that gun that you sold to your brother, we think that was part of you being in the business of selling firearms, so we're going to charge you. And you can't be a wuss. If you get scared and say, oh my God, I got a family, I got kids, okay, I'm sorry, and you're mad about it, and you're going to go on Facebook and say, this is wrong, this is unfair, please, Massa, don't beat me, this is unfair, please, boss. I know that sounded racist, but get over it. If you want to know my true intention, asterisk future conversation. People cannot give in to tyranny personally and expect to have success fighting tyranny broadly. The only way to invalidate unjust overreaching of the executive branch of the government is to beat them in a court of law. And here's why. The legislatures in the cities, in the counties, and in the states, and in the federal government pass hundreds of laws every session. There's not a competition to repeal laws. Okay? They're like weeds. As regulations grow, freedoms die. Okay? Yes, you can reform a law. Yes, you can modify a law. But for every good reform, and you know this, and every modified law, we get more tyranny, more do-gooders saying, oh, we need a law to fix this problem. Oh, we need a law to solve that problem. Oh, and that growth of the law has now reached such critical portions, no reform can beat it back. For example, Obamacare. Okay, despite all the rhetoric in the world, we haven't been able to beat back Obamacare. Even if we could, the political force that got Obamacare passed in the first place is not going to just give up. So even if we got Obamacare repealed, the growing tyranny in the medical industrial complex, in the medical profession, is not going to just go away. The only way to beat back government overreach is through the courts. And the liberal socialists have figured this out. They've strategized and said, well, geez, then why don't we get judges on the bench who will support our side? And why don't we have organizations like the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center and etc. who will fight in the courts for social reform through government? You know, on the Liberty Front, we have almost no fighting because, again, our enemies can use organizations like the ACLU. They can use organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center. And you know what, by the way? The Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU aren't our enemies. They're simply competing organizations trying to influence our government. Our job is to beat them intellectually and show them we have better ideas. Yes, we have a few malicious, malevolent actors who lead organizations and do things that are against us, but we're all Americans. And it's like we've forgotten that our job is not to demonize our enemy. That's their tool. Our job is to persuade them and to beat them and to outmaneuver them and to prove the concept of freedom and liberty. Here's how you do it. Every ticket you get, every tax assessment you get, every interaction you have with the government, you, not some special interest lobby group, not some law office, you have to learn how to defend your rights. Just like you dress yourself every day. Just like you provide for yourself and your family. Just like you parent your children. If you want liberty, you've got to learn how to defend liberty. And we in the liberty movement have abdicated the legal world. The Hammonds, who are these prototypical American people talk about how good they were. You should have seen the personal witnesses in court that talked about all the good they've done in their community. Good, salt-of-the-earth people. Even the judge, I think, said they were salt-of-the-earth people. They had no idea how to defend their liberty, because they've been trained, taught, and educated to just let other people do it. And most of you think, well, if I ever get in trouble, I'll get a public defender, or mom or dad will give me $5,000 or $10,000 to go hire a lawyer. And you have to understand, most lawyers don't even know how to litigate. Most lawyers don't even know what to do in a courtroom. That is the big glaring elephant in the room, my friends, and you can do something about it, and you can teach your kids how to do something about it, and you can start doing it today. We're not going to talk about, I can give you a bullet point outline on how to do that. Okay? We have a very organized strategy on how to do it. And I'm not talking about nonsense. I'm talking, if you want to show how to stop, you don't need a political lobbyist to stop Obama's executive orders. You don't need a new president to stop Obama's executive orders. He won't anyway. You don't need an organized liberty movement to stop Obama's executive orders. You need to learn how to defend your rights. And in the organized liberty movement, we need lots of people who know how to defend their rights. And I'm not, a lot of the liberty movement focuses on, hey, am I free to go? Hey, am I free to go? No, I don't consent to that search. Yes, encounters with the police is one way to defend liberty, but the police have the guns. And if you want to avoid physical violence, the way to beat abusive police tactics is in the courtroom. But you want to give that up, and most people in the liberty movement, especially people with a military background and people with a kind of conservative grassroots, down to earth, conservative American way background, they have this contempt for the law because it's become corrupt. But it's become corrupt because you're not there. It's become corrupt because the only people who go to court to fight for liberty are the people who have very little interests in liberty. Go sit in a courtroom. For every 9 people who stand up in front of a judge, for every 10 people who stand up in front of a judge, 9 of them don't even have a conscious awareness of their rights. They just hope the judge will be nice to them and not take away their kids and not make them pay too much money and not put them in jail too long. And for the 1 out of 10 who's concerned about their rights, they're turning to the lawyer next to them going, what should I say? What should I say? What should I say? There are so few people that know, as a matter of civics, how to be a citizen. Do you know, and this is the last thing I'll say on this. The definition of a liberal education in ancient Rome, the model for the founders in structuring what it means to be a liberal citizen, meaning a citizen who can stand and defend liberty, is to know how to advocate for yourself in public, in courts and in legislative halls. Way more important than voting, way more important than contacting your legislator, is the ability to stand up in court and defend yourself, in your children, in education, in medicine, in the operation of motor vehicles, in the defense of your property. Asterisks, you got to learn more about that, my friends. In this situation, the Hammonds had poor legal help and poor legal strategy, and Ammon right now has a poor legal strategy. And even if this does end well, and I pray to God it doesn't end bloody, he's going to face federal prosecutors. And he's going to have to defend himself. And instead of calling on 100 people to come into the courtroom and be mad, he should call on 5 people who know the law and can beat prosecutors. And some of you who do a little background research on me know that I know whereof I speak in terms of what it means and what it takes to fight federal prosecutors. All right. Anybody still listening, Kimball? Any
50.
questions?
50. Nothing
Nothing worth bringing up?
really.
All right. I talked about being pro-government. We've got to take control of the narrative. We've got to stop this whole we the people crap. Okay. Don't have time to go too far into this. But because we are so disempowered and we're so desperate, we've adopted the rhetoric of the socialist left and the collectivist left. And there's this idea that we the people are going to take back our government. This idea that we the people, you are not we the people, numbskull, you're you. And I'm me. And I understand the founders use that language, but it's been so co-opted that what we the people means is the government. When you go to a court of law, the prosecutor, quote unquote, speaks for we the people. Now, whether you think that's the way it should be, that's the way it currently is. And so we've got to deal with a strategy that addresses the corruption where it is. We need to reform, repair, and finish our form of Republican free government. And we cannot advocate as, quote unquote, we the people. One of the problems Ammon has, and again, these guys are friends. Honestly, every day I keep asking myself if I should just get in a car and go up there. I've been talking to Ammon, I've been messaging him, trying to talk to him about this situation, and I haven't gone up there because I disagree with the strategy. But he's a friend, these people are friends, but they are not we the people. He's Ammon Bundy. You see, the way free society works is self-government. And self-government starts with being able to act for yourself. Now, we need to organize and work together. But let me explain something. This is an hour-long lecture. I'm just going to give you the quick cliff notes so you can think about this. If you love liberty and you love America, you've got to learn, we the people, underneath the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of each of the republics, the states, and underneath the government of the states and the counties, we the people isn't anarchy. It's government. And we've got to learn how to get government on our side. And that's hard. We've got to learn how to get government pointed in the right direction. It's our government. Again, this is part of being pro-government. Let me give you an example. The sheriff up in Oregon, in this county, is not on the libertarian side. He's not even up there talking to him. My friends, we're in a war. We've got to choose our battles. We've got to pick our strategies. And mobilizing people who love liberty, who have a willingness to travel, who have a willingness to protest, who have a willingness to march, who have a willingness to sit in, who have a willingness to use arms, who have a willingness to form a militia, all of that is potentially good. But we've got to get government on our side. Let me tell you the difference. Ammon says he was up there for a couple weeks talking to the different government officials, trying to advocate and trying to get them to stand up for the Hammonds and for this against this government overreach. And he says, and they say they want to help the people of this county. But you must do that with the government on your side. And the reason liberty lovers give up is they say, but they're not on our side. We don't have time to elect them. And even if we elect one person to get us... No. You've got to get a mayor on your side, or a city council on your side, or a county commissioner on your side. And that takes work, and I can show you how to do that. One of the things we do in building the American Liberty Society is working with all these different organizations and showing you how to do this. Let me tell you what would happen. If you had a city or county government on your side, and then you had 100 citizens helping them resist the federal government, that, my friends, is using Americanism to fight back and beat back federal tyranny. I saw a video not long ago about a sheriff in Texas who was calling on all responsible citizens to get their concealed carry or to open carry. I don't remember the specific details, but he was saying arm yourself. And here's what he said. He said, we can't protect all of you with what's happening right now. So number one, arm yourself so you can protect yourself. Number two, he said, if me and my men get into trouble, I don't ever want to be outgunned. So instead of going to the federal government and asking for militarization and more weapons, I want the citizens of this county on our side. I want them to come and stand with us if we ever need them. Spend more time figuring out how to get and support leaders like that. That's liberty, my friends. And I can show you how to do it. It is much more effective than this kind of protest. And then if you showed up to support a county commission, I'll give you an example of a friend of mine, Morgan Philpott, who ran for governor here in Utah. And he has startled everyone when he said, here's what I will do as the governor. And a reporter said, but that's against federal law. And he held, in a press conference, he held out his hands and he said, then they'll have to come and arrest me. And I will have to depend on my citizens here in Utah to come to my aid and defense. That's Americanism, my friends. You know, you want to organize a militia. Thank God for people with military training who can organize their friends and help. So we don't have to always depend on the governor calling out the National Guard, who sometimes he can't even do it because there's so much federal overreach even there. Strategy. If these, I don't care if there's a dozen, if there's 100 men up there, if they were helping a government organization and supporting them and expanding them, and you know, look, it's not that hard. I don't want to. Guys, you can get 2 or 3 elected officials on your side easily. There are people who love liberty everywhere. There are judges who love liberty. Not many, but there are judges. There are bureaucrats who love liberty. There are government employees who love liberty. You've got to learn how to identify them, work with them, organize for them, and then come to their aid and help them. Work through. That's how we reform government. We have to reclaim our government. Because if we put ourselves up as insurrectionists in opposition to our government, they will just kill us. They will just jail us. Tyranny has grown so big, you cannot stop them. Not one person within the sound of my voice is strong enough to go up against a corrupt U.S. prosecutor. Not one of you within the sound of my voice is strong enough to go up against a corrupt state prosecutor. And for every victory liberty-minded people have going up against those tyrants, there are hundreds and hundreds of people. It's not just ranchers. It's not just the land battle. I want you to look. In my case, it was 5 months after Barack Obama took over Washington, D.C. It was 5 months after he put his cabinet in place through the Justice Department, and they started targeting freedom movements. You might know this. The IRS, Lois Lerner thing. It wasn't just the IRS, by the way, who was targeting us. Because there are people in the government who want to use the government to do something much different than support America. Barack Obama said he wanted to radically transform America. Okay, if you don't want America radically transformed, if you want to reclaim the principle of the republic, we've got to win. And what happened with me is I had organized the most powerful political movement west of the Mississippi. I had the largest numbers, the most strategically organized in the last 30 years, and we were doing amazing things politically, and we'd come onto the scene. Nobody knew who we were. I mean, we were just brand new, and it was amazing how quickly we got organized. And when you start studying our basic principles and you start advocating and you start not just popping off being hot-headed and not just being mad and protesting, when we got organized, we started to exercise so much political muscle that we were targeted. And within 5 months, I went from having a perfect reputation. I was friends with political leaders, all the prominent national leaders, not all, many prominent national leaders, state leaders, institutional leaders. I had friends everywhere. And we were doing amazing things. And they came after me, bam! And the federal government's first thing they try to do is shut down my reputation. The next thing they try to do is go after my money and my ability to wage a war. And then they put me under siege, my companies, etc. It was no different than what they did to the Hammonds. I just wasn't a rancher. I was a businessman. I was an entrepreneur who was standing in the way. I was a threat. You guys, this is happening to people all over the place. It is happening to businessmen and women. It is happening to moms and dads who homeschool their children. It's happening to businessmen who use their profits to get involved in politics. It's happening to politicians who buck the party establishment. It's happening to institutions who are being coerced by the government to maintain their legitimacy. We are in a battle where the ideas are so radically different, and the infiltration into the government is so powerful that we can't beat them without an organized strategy. And part of that organized strategy is learning how to reclaim our government. I can show you how in a small community, 10 families can reclaim a local community government. 10 active principle-based families. And then 50 and then 100. I can show you that. And let me just tell you, they would be more effective, more quickly in restoring Republican government to their county than anything else. And that's what we've got to have, county by county. If you had a county government up in Oregon right now that was asking for citizens to come and help them stand up against the BLM, this whole conversation would be radically different. Nobody would be talking about Ammon Bundy. Everybody would be talking about the abusive government overreach, which is the real story here. The next thing you got to learn how to do is form government. See, a lot of you know things like, safety committees and committees of correspondence, but most people don't. You've got to learn how to form government starting in your home. Well, you guys, that's about halfway through. I wanted to talk about what you can do personally. I want to talk about institutional relationships. I was going to talk about the LDS Church's statement here. Let me end with the last one, and then we'll just have another Periscope tomorrow night or next. The last thing is, I want to admonish my liberty-minded friends. You've got to treat friends like friends. When people are willing to take a stand for liberty, they're on our side. It doesn't matter whether they're part of the American Legion or whether they're part of Promise Keepers or Oath Keepers. It doesn't matter whether they're part of the Three Percenters, the American Independent Party. It doesn't matter whether they're part of the John Birch Society or the Free Capitalist Society or the Free Capitalist Project. If they love liberty, we've got to learn that it's not a threat to us to support them. We don't have to always agree with them. We don't have to always get involved with everything they do. But we have got to build a veritable army in this liberty movement of brain-on, intellectually active, sincere men and women in local, regional, and national efforts. And you do not publicly criticize people who are on your team without strengthening the enemy. You work within normal channels. Look, it's about, we're building something called the American Liberty Society, and here's what it is. It's about building bridges of communication so that all the freedom movements and all the freedom-minded people can focus on being part of an organized effort. And you're scared to do that because people don't want to have tyrants over them. I understand that. Let me just tell you, there's nobody, well, I don't know, I'm pretty rebellious. But organization and tyranny aren't the same thing. We've got to work together, and we've got to learn how to treat our friends like friends. And can't be so afraid. We can't be motivated by fear of loss and by scarcity thinking to say, well, I'm an atheist, so I can't support the Christian Liberty Society. Or I'm a Christian, so I can't talk to those Ayn Rand objectivists. Listen, truth is truth. Principles govern. We're not going to win if we don't advocate based on truth and principles and smartly with organized effort and strategy. Being right is not enough. Being passionate is not enough. Being angry is not enough. Listening to talk radio is not enough. Firing off comments on Facebook is not enough. All you're doing is alerting our enemies to who you are so they can target you, marginalize you, minimize you, attack your organization, and make you insignificant. I guarantee you every person up in Idaho and every person on Facebook speaking in favor of what's going on there is getting an FBI agent, what's called a 302, or an IRS Memorandum of Understanding. You don't even know what those are, and they're doing a memo on you to decide whether you are a threat. You are not a threat to them, because we are still all Americans. And just because we want to reform the government, just because we want to repair the government, just because we want to put the limits back in place that our founders started, we want to finish the American Revolution. We're not a threat to the FBI. We're not a threat to the IRS. We have friends in the FBI. We have friends in the IRS. We have friends in the federal courts. We have a few friends in the U.S. Attorney's offices. We need more friends. We need to win, my friend. If we do not win, we will have to take up arms more frequently to defend ourselves. This situation with the Bundy, Ammon, and these other, and I keep talking about Ammon just because I have a few mutual friends. I know there are other leaders in this movement up there. This will pale in comparison to what our world's going to look like in 5 years or 10 years if we don't learn what I've been talking about on this Periscope. We don't have much time. Maybe 5 more years, maybe 10 more years. Even Supreme Court justices. I have some mutual connections with friends who are clerking for Supreme Court justices. Supreme Court justices are scared to death about executive overreach. It's not the courts who are screwing up America. It's not even the legislators who are passing these crazy laws that are screwing up America. It is executive overreach. It's the growth of government through the executive. That's where tyranny happens. Yes, we've got to reform legislation. Yes, we've got to have good appointments to the bench. But the overreach of the executive is on both the federal level and on the state level is so enormous that unless we do the things that I'm talking about here over the next 5 years, look, when I started to organize the Free Capitalist Project back in 2004 and 2005, we had never had the federal government nationalize a private corporation in the United States. Now it's happened over a dozen times since President Barack Obama has come into power. We thought George Bush's consolidation of government in the Department of Homeland Security and the empowerment of the National Security Agency was bad. President Obama's extrajudicial use of force, his drone campaigns, his warmongering is tenfold what was happening in the George W. Bush administration. In the last 7 years, the liberty movement, think about this, the Tea Party came about, the new emboldened conservatives came about, the libertarians have grown, and in the midst of all that, we got the TPP, we got the growth of the IRS, we got the growth of Department of Homeland Security, we got no laws enforcing immigration, we got nationalization of corporations, we got a Justice Department who selectively prosecutes and enforces the law and doesn't defend liberty. We got Obamacare. We got the growth of the EPA like you wouldn't believe. We've got international agreements with Iran, the international environmental. That has, in the last 7 years, we have barely begun to wake up. We don't want to wait 7 more years to try to do the things I'm talking about, my friends. So here's my question for you. You stuck with me this long. I've been working with a lot of key people, but it's not about me. It's about you. It's about your family. It's about your kids. It's about your home. We are not we. We are individual Americans who believe in liberty. And we have an organization and we have a strategic approach that's about rubber meeting the road on a day-to-day basis about how to live as a free citizen, both as a political advocate, but for your own economic self-reliance, for your own influence in your local community, in all the areas of education and art and culture and media, in your religious institutions, in education. But most of you are not even ready. Everybody says, well, Rick, what should we do? What should we do? Most of you aren't even ready because you're in bondage. So if you want to be part of the solution, and if what I've said to you tonight resonates, if what I've said to you tonight stirs you up, if you're the kind of person who would give blood in the cause of liberty, but wants to reclaim liberty without the shedding of blood, that wants to love America, that's angry as hell at the corruption and the overreach, then we need to correspond. We need to be in touch. You're just listening tonight. Drop me a message. rick@freecapitalist.com. Or you can just go to freecapitalist.com, click on any of the subscribe links so you get emails, then you can respond to me. Go on Facebook, message me. I'll show you what our strategy is. I'll show you how this can change your life now. I'll show you how you can stand up for liberty and be more prosperous and have more peace and be more engaged than you have ever been before. And then join me tomorrow night. Tomorrow night at 10 o'clock, we'll talk about some of the things we didn't talk about here. I specifically want to talk about the LDS Church's response and the role of civil disobedience, and how civil disobedience can be effective and how it can be ineffective, and why and when we should engage in civil disobedience, if we should engage in civil disobedience. I love liberty like you do, my friends. Some of you are stronger than me. Some of you are smarter than me. Not many. But we won't win this alone. We've got to work together, and we've got to take back this narrative. We've got to win friends. We've got to win the hearts and minds of good men and women who want to see America on a different trajectory. We've got to be pro-government, not anti-government. In our cause of liberty, we've got to understand that each of us and the choices we make on a day-to-day basis are either part of winning or we're going down in flaming glory. And if you want to win, I want to win. And I feel like part of the reason I'm on it, Ammon Bundy talked about feeling divinely inspired to do what he's doing. I don't have any qualms with anyone who acts in a way that's Ammon, if you listen to what he's saying, I don't have any right to stand between him and his God. I feel like my place on this earth is to keep sending these messages to you so that we can get to know each other. We can work together. We can build the American Liberty Society. We can expand the Free Capitalist Project. We can advance the cause of liberty smartly and passionately and effectively. And it's very real, my friends. And the day very well could come that we have to put our life on the line. There are people who do put their life on the line. And it's worth it. But it's not worth it if we're not fighting to win. So that's my message to you. We got to fight to win. Pull it.